been a month since the wrestlers began their protest against WFI chief Brij Bhushan Sharan Singh. Now, in this last month, all of the members of government who've spoken to the press have stuck by their stand, vouching for the investigation, insisting that the investigation be complete before any action is taken. But this morning, starting with an exclusive story on the front page of the Indian Express, and then picked up by several other media houses, there was a leak of 2 of the FIRs that were filed by the 7 women who accused Brij Bhushan Sharan Singh of sexual harassment. The details in this FIR are damning. Before we go any further, I do want to issue a trigger warning because the details in this FIR and the details I'm going to deal with are extremely triggering, especially for those people who find sexual harassment triggering. Now, according to the FIR, these instances took place between 2012 and 2022, an entire decade in which the harassment and the intimidation allegedly continued. The FIRs, according to the Indian Express, states that WFI chief Brij Bhushan Sharan Singh allegedly groped women athletes on a regular basis, asked inappropriate questions, demanded sexual favors holding their careers to ransom, brushed his hands across various parts of their bodies without consent. There were 2 instances of asking for sexual favors in return for professional assistance, which is his job. 15 instances, 15, of sexual harassment, including episodes of inappropriate touching, molestation, running his hands all over their chest, underneath their t-shirts, on the pretense of checking their breathing, several instances of intimidation and stalking of very young members of the team, and a shared sense of fear and trauma. He's also accused of creating problems for and denying professional opportunities to those who rejected his sexual advances. In one particular instance, one of the complainants has quoted him and has alleged that he said when she pushed him away, she said, and I quote, "Zyada smart ban rahi hai kya? Aage koi competition nahi khelna hai kya tumhe? Are you acting so smart? Do you not want to be considered for tournaments in the future?" Now, these were all detailed in those FIRs. The Indian Express also says that the case of POCSO, the FIR was filed by the minor's father, who had alleged that the young person was completely disturbed and cannot be at peace anymore. Sexual harassment by the accused continues to haunt her. There were details of what kind of sexual harassment that was, as well carried by the Indian Express. But I want to focus on one thing in particular. The quote that I read out for you, which suggests that every time the alleged harassment was rejected by the victims of that harassment, there were threats made to their careers. Aage koi competition nahi khelna hai. Withholding, their professional opportunities for sexual, favors. We want to stop for a second here and look at what I'm calling the imbalance between athletes and officials in the Indian system. And then we look specifically at the imbalance between these wrestlers, these female wrestlers, and Brij Bhushan Sharan Singh. First of all, this is what the system is like. There is selections. Whether or not an athlete makes it to the selection of any team, national or otherwise, is entirely at the hands of the very powerful officials. Secondly, something called draws. So in tournaments and in selections of tournaments, athletes are meant to fight rounds or meant to compete in rounds where they get knocked out, and we figure out who gets selected for various things. Now, these draws determine whether a complete newcomer goes up against a seeded player or a number 1 player. That newcomer is very likely to get knocked out in the first round and will never make it to the top of the round at all, and hence will not get selected. So how an athlete, a young athlete, is drawn, who they compete with, and how far they wind up going in these tournaments is also very often in the hands of the officials. Grants, sponsorships, and selections for camps are made by the officials as well, which gives them a lot of power over the careers of young athletes. Remember, athletes also in India get jobs, government jobs, with the police, with the railways. Even these recommendations are made by officials, and these officials are normally connected to politics. Now, specifically looking at women's wrestling in India. Like I've said before, a lot of the wrestlers in India come from the state of Haryana, a state that does not have a great track record when it comes to women empowerment or women equality. But in Haryana, because of the very popular Phogat sisters, whose story was made even popular by celluloid heroes on Bollywood who have not spoken up in their favor right now. But because of their success, many other young girls in Haryana have been taking up wrestling. Now, in a state like Haryana, it's not easy for girls to go to training, for girls to travel outside of their homes and outside of their cities or states or towns in order to compete, to stay in hotels, to go out of the country on their own. This is not something that would come easily in these families, but because wrestling gives them that empowerment, they're able to do it. Now, several of these young women have been quoted during the protest saying that we could not tell our families that this was happening to us because they would no longer allow us to compete. They would tell us to stay home. They would get us married. They would stop our wrestling careers. So in many cases, they had to stay quiet. Also, we know that the oversight committee set up by the sports ministry to look into this matter back in January when the protests first began had said very clearly that there is an absence of a duly constituted internal complaints committee where these athletes can complain. So when you have someone very powerful harassing you and asking you for sexual favors, where do you go? Where would these athletes go to complain against Brij Bhushan Sharan Singh? Who would listen to them, given how powerful he is, if there was no internal complaints committee where that complaint could be taken seriously and kept anonymous and they would be protected? Also, let's remember now this very powerful, heady concoction if you add many dollops of politics. This individual we are talking about is a powerful politician, which means that not only does he control the selection and the draws and the grants and the sponsorship and the jobs, he also has a considerable sway over the police. He has a considerable sway over the other politicians and powerful people and the akhadas and the money that's coming in and out of the game, because he happens to be a very, very powerful politician who is obviously not being questioned because of his ability to win elections. So while this entire protest has gone on now for over a month, and there were many people on social media who have called the protesting wrestlers anti-national. The protesting wrestlers have been called politically motivated. They've been called dramebaz as well when they took their medals to the Ganga, saying that they're going to throw it in the river because there's absolutely no option. But consider the power imbalance between young women wrestlers and young girl wrestlers, some of whom were minors, and a man who is so powerful and wields so much influence over the establishment, over the sport itself, and over the lives and careers of these young women. It would have taken a lot for them to come forward and to actually voice their opinion. And yet somehow, in spite of how clear the rules are about what needs to happen when cases like this are filed, specifically, remember I told you the POCSO case, which involves a minor, says very specifically that the accused has the burden of proof. Whereas we've seen that the victims are being asked for proof, the accused has to be removed from positions of power immediately so that they don't intimidate the witnesses and the victim, and the accused should not be allowed to tamper with any evidence, and the accused should be arrested immediately. In this case, none of those things have been done because the accused in this case is extremely powerful. So powerful that most of the young girls in question have taken a very long time to come forward and speak up. All right, so before I let you go, I do want to thank you for all the love you gave us when we launched Beetroot News yesterday. That's our news brand, and we're starting it off with our app. We have read through every single message that you have sent us. We were completely overwhelmed, and we're responding to each and every one of you. We're taking all your pieces of feedback on board to improve Beetroot as we go along. If you haven't downloaded our app yet, it's Beetroot News, Beatroot News. You can find it on the App Store, both on Android and iOS. Do download, be part of our inner circle that's trying to build something really special. It's completely free. Download it, use it, and let us know what you think. Thank you.